Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, CYRISMA. RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security. Did you know that over 63% of cyber breaches are caused by a third-party vendor? CyberGRX is on a mission to modernize third-party cyber risk management. Built on the market's first third-party cyber risk exchange, CyberGRX arms you with fast and accurate data, a proven and innovative approach, so you can make rapid, informed decisions and confidently engage with partners. Learn how partnering with CyberGRX will help you become cyber certain. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberGRX.
And welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, would you like to have all your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Do you have a question for one of our illustrious hosts, someone from the Security Weekly team? Or do you just wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community? Do all this by subscribing on your favorite podcast catcher, signing up for our mailing list, and joining our Discord server. Do that to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Start at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, if you want to learn how to build an integrated security platform in our webcast, we will be talking about that on our webcast on October 28th. Also, on November 5th, we'll show you how to build proper metrics and KPIs. Learn why you should stop trying to discover and classify data in our webcast on November 12th. That one actually interests me. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to see what we have coming up. Or you can visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view our previously recorded webcasts. All right. Enough of that. I would like to introduce you to a friend and colleague and co-worker at Online Business Systems, Mr. Alain Espinosa. Alain, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's truly an honor to be here with you, and I appreciate the invitation very much.
My only regret is that we can't be doing this together and enjoying a Cuban cigar.
Yes, I've heard that on your show you have bourbon and cigars at times, but today I have just some tea for this occasion.
Yeah, that's what I have too. Tea.
You two are just not up to par. I'm sorry.
Since our coworkers in management might be watching right now.
Yes.
So Alain, I invited you on today. We want to talk about logging and monitoring and all the travails that go with that. But because you are new to Security and Compliance Weekly, want to take a few moments just to get to know you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into cybersecurity, and how you ended up in the very important position you hold today at Online Business Systems.
Sure. So I like to think that I got into security, if you will, back when I was around 8 years old. I actually locked my family out of their house. So my whole thing as a kid was I want to make sure everything's secure and well, and we ended up having to break a basement window to get back in. So I like to think that was kind of my start, if you will. While it wasn't cyber, it was security as a whole. But I've been in IT for around 25 or so years. And really, security was always at the foundation of everything that I did and the way that I thought, quite honestly. Well, I always had security in mind. And then about 6 or so years ago, I was able to make the transition from sort of IT and that world to more specifically information security. and it's been awesome. It's very exciting. It's always challenging. It's quite the challenge to keep up with the bad guys, if you will, right? Sometimes I think, wow, I wish I was as smart as some of the bad guys, because they seem to be quite ahead of the curve oftentimes. And my journey took me through InfraGard. I don't know if a lot of people may be familiar with InfraGard. It's a initiative that the FBI started, a program that they started back in 1996. And I've had the honor of serving on the national board for InfraGard as well as the local board and such. And so just really dug in and been in the community for a number of years, and then ended up at Online Business Systems through someone that I had previously served on a board together. And just been amazed at a company that is so focused on delivering well, quite honestly, and doing well by their clients. So I've just hung around and really enjoyed the ride.
And I guess, I was being presumptuous because nobody knows what you do unless they're reading our show notes. What is actually your role at Online?
Sure. I'm the Director of Security Operations. So I essentially oversee our managed security services practice as a whole. And we provide a security and event monitoring for our clients, as well as vulnerability scanning and a host of other products and features and services as well. So I oversee the team, the program itself. And in particular, when I first started, oversaw the Security Operations Center itself, which I still do, the SOC, and a team of analysts that sit there and monitor our clients' security postures.
Okay, great. Thank you for that context.
I've got to tell you that. Hang on 1 second.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
I've got to tell you that InfraGard is something I'm very familiar with. My wife is actually the vice president of InfraGard for Delaware. So I was just amused when you mentioned that. Yep. So anyway,
awesome.
Yep.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yep. And I sit on the InfraGard of Maryland.
Very good.
So there is an InfraGard connection, and I know how to spell InfraGard.
That's right. You got to leave the U out of it because we need you.
Right. You got to leave the U out of it. Now, I've never been a member, but I have spoken at various InfraGard events over the years in various places. The other compulsory part of the program is we want to ask you what we call the hot seat question, which is because we focus on security and compliance and sort of the dynamic tension between the two. We like to ask our guests just sort of where they're coming from. No right or wrong answer. We're just trying to get a glimpse into what makes you tick. So the question is, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Sure. So I think I'm probably going to repeat something you've said on the show in the past, and that is compliance to me is the absolute minimum requirements for security, right? So I don't see compliance as actual, I hate to put it this way, but actual cybersecurity in and of itself, or comprehensive security. Maybe I'll use that term instead. I see compliance as a start. And so for me, I know that my passion, and when I work with clients, it's focusing on appropriately and effectively securing their assets, right, which equals reducing risk for the organization. I realize that compliance has a role in that, of course, and does that to some degree. That is the underlying reason for compliance, if you will. But for me, it's taking it beyond that, right? Compliance is, again, sort of for me that baseline. We're going to start there, but there's typically more that we're going to want to do to secure an organization.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and you sort of alluded to some things that we discussed in our first segment today, and to just sort of to tee off this discussion. I wanted to mention, Frank brought it up in the first segment. He mentioned sort of the classic issue of third parties and third party risk, failing to keep track of your third party from a risk perspective or security perspective. He mentioned the target breach, and the target breach, I know it as well for sort of the classic example of from a security event logging and monitoring perspective of they were a company that at the time, and I was an active QSA back then. They had a reputation for doing security right. They'd made a good investment in security. They actually had a lot of people working in a security group. It wasn't just, other duties as assigned, and they had a lot of tools and technologies in place. And as the breach was announced and details about that were discovered, one of the things that jumped out at many people was the fact that they had, and I'm not even going to say what tool it was. I don't even remember. Somebody else probably does. But they had logging in place. They had a SIM or SIEM or SIEM solution in place that was capturing the logs. They just weren't responding to it. And fast forward to today, I have a customer where I'm trying to work with them through their, building a logging and monitoring and detection response. PCI, counter clicks up one, requires you not only to capture specific events related to security events and related to activity that is indicative of people wanting to do bad things like steal your credit card data, they also require you to pull it off into a centralized logging solution, or they want you to take it off whatever is generating the log. Most people use a SIEM solution to do that these days, it seems. But my customer today, target them, seems to struggle with, okay, we've got all the technology in place for capturing the logs. It's here. We've got them. What seems to always be lacking is, what do you do with it? And that, to me, is one of the big problems with the logging and monitoring activities in general. So I wanted to have a talk about it. I wanted to invite you on because you live it sort of on a daily basis, because we're trying to help our customers get over that hurdle. So so let me ask a question. I'll ask it to you, Alan, but obviously Scott and Josh, you can jump in. But what are the classic things that are wrong with most companies' approach to security event logging and monitoring? What are some of the things that you've seen are just kind of, I can't believe they did that.
There's a hold on, Jeff. Hold on.
I can't even. There's a
deeper question here, right? And the deeper question is, how does a company know when they're ready for that process, right? You heard
PCI
talk about
PCI. Can you do that while you're talking? Can you keep the counter?
You heard
PCI.
You heard Wendy Nather talk about the security poverty line, right? Which we have now taken to the security competency line, right? Mm-hmm. It's the demarcation between when companies can stop not just worrying about sales, but also start worrying about their cyber posture, right? So how do you know as a company, and I'll put it out to the three of you, how do you know as a company whether or not your process is mature enough to not only install SIEM and log monitoring solution, but to be able to capitalize on the ROI that is associated with that action?
Can we have an entire episode where we respond to every question with another question?
I don't know.
I'll answer it. I'll answer it. Not a problem. So the answer is the minute you start the company. And the reason is that even if your process is not mature enough to really gain ROI directly out of, we logged X, Y, and Z, and we saw bad things, and we have no way to fix it. That right there is a sign. You have no way to fix it. That's a problem. Let's get this fixed.
Yeah, but companies can't. No, you can't do that, though. You cannot do that, right?
Why not?
Okay, maybe you can, but it's all dependent on what. It all depends on what you're actually producing, right? If you're producing a widget, right, and you have a manufacturing facility, a small one, do you have time or the funds available to be able to put in a cybersecurity solution or be able to fix stuff in your own facility, right, while you're trying to worry about sales and keeping roofs over people's heads?
Well, that's why why people bring in MSPs, MSSPs, third-party products, things like that. I'm not saying that every single company in the world, from a one-person shop up to a gazillion-person shop, needs everything we can potentially do, or everything anybody can potentially do, or everything OBS can do for them. What I'm saying is that there's value in knowing sometimes what you don't know. Okay, and sometimes realizing, hey,
that's a profound statement, Josh. There's value
you're
in
talking
knowing
like
what you don't
the
know.
white albatross of security right there, Josh.
No, I'm talking about the Johari window, or the Rumsfeld conundrum, which is the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, but as a business leader, are you really going to give a crap?
What's currently unknown is what Alan thinks about this. So, Alan, you live this day to day. You're in the trenches. What are some of the horrendous things that you see that you would love if companies would do differently?
Yeah, so what I've experienced and seen is that companies tend to think either A, they don't need a SIEM, right? So let's start with that. A vendor comes along, and this is not a dig at security vendors at all. They come along with a solution, whatever that solution is, a DLP, endpoint, et cetera, and it sounds great, and it sounds like it's going to do everything that they need it to do, right? It's going to eliminate the risk or mitigate the risk, et cetera. And what I think companies fail to see, quite honestly, is that, again, I'm not talking about a small shop, like, I'm not talking about 5 people, right? But as you start to grow and you have these security tools, even if you have best of breed and you have these amazing tools and controls in place, without a central place to actually filter these logs into and monitor the various activities of all these different disparate tools, you get lost very quickly. And so that's one thing I've seen. The second thing is there are companies that I've seen have an aversion to having a SIEM or to having security monitoring at that level, because they think it's just going to be really noisy, And I'm sure you've heard this analogy before. I always, what I tell customers or potential customers is I give them the analogy of a home alarm. And I say, a bad SIEM implementation is like a home alarm that they keep contacting you because a window got open, a back door's open, whatever, there's motion in the living room. Those things in and of themselves don't necessarily represent a risk in and of themselves. However, in context, they may represent a risk, but the context has to come from the customer in that sense. So I need to tell my alarm company, the back door should not be open during these hours. And if that back door is open during, certain hours, then I need to know. That's important to me. So, that goes to asset classification, which is something I find we come across clients that some of them have never been through that exercise. Some of them could tell you, if you ask them, hey, what's important? They'll start rattling off, my SQL server is important, my HR server is important, et cetera. But they've never actually gone through the process of classifying their assets. And so they're not even, they don't have it documented as to what's actually important to them. So answer to your question is, I think that, companies have an aversion oftentimes because they think it's going to be too noisy, or they think it's going to be too cumbersome, even if they are outsourcing it. And that's where, frankly, it really depends on who you outsource it to. You can outsource it to companies that, sure, they're kind of like that alarm vendor who, frankly, typically doesn't care. My home alarm vendor does not care. They sold me a package, they sold me sensors. They said, install these sensors and we'll monitor for you, right? But versus another company that may come on site and actually assess and ask questions and consult. So I think that's, at least in that phase of selecting a managed security service provider, that's going to be what will, I think, make it or break it in terms of success for the client is, do they have that consultation from the provider, unless they're very, very mature, in which case maybe they don't need it. If they're ultra mature and they could walk in and say, we know our assets, we have them classified, we know what's important to us, we know what type of rules we're interested in triggering, and we know what the escalation plan should look like. And some companies do have those answers, but I have found that very, very few do. And so it's really a matter of looking at I think, a SIEM provider, a managed security service provider, as not a product provider, And I think that's a really important differentiator. It's not a product provider, but a full service provider. So you don't just go to the product provider and say, okay, I want these shoes in a size 12, but someone that's actually going to, pardon the bad pun here, walk through it with you.
That sounds good, Alan. But the problem I've seen with that, and I've worked with many companies over the year that engaged with managed security service providers of various ilk, and my opinion is mostly companies engage third parties, and it actually really extends beyond security services to just about anything. Is if we engage a third party, then we don't have to think about it. We don't have to understand. Yep. We don't have to worry about it. So I guess my question is, how do we as practitioners, not saying we specifically online, but we as practitioners, how do we convince companies that, to quote Josh, who had this very profound statement earlier, that there's great benefit in knowing what you don't know? How do you convince companies that, no, you really do want to know this stuff? You don't want to just throw it over the wall and let somebody else deal with it. The idea that, it's collaborative and it's engaging and it's whatever you're doing is an extension of your security program, and knowing is better than not knowing. PCI. How do we convince companies that they should do that?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple approaches to convincing a company. I mean, you use the word convince. I think there may be some that will still not be convinced, if you will. But I think the approach is, number one, that this is not that monitoring is not just a security tool by itself. It's actually a business tool. It's not just technology. This is an actual integral piece of reducing risk and mitigating risk in a business environment. I think when you start to talk along those lines, that shifts the conversation a little bit, especially that, a lot of executives are averse to talk about security sometimes because they think it's just a bunch of tech head discussions, right? And that they're just trying, someone's trying to sell them some other piece of technology that may or may not need. In terms of the need, and convincing them, if you will, of the actual need of having said service and knowing, like you said, the unknowns. What I tell clients oftentimes is that if we go back X amount of years, and I couldn't tell you how many years, attacks were very targeted, right? So there was some group somewhere, whether it was a nation state or some hacking group or a criminal organization, that would target a company. That's changed. That still happens very, very frequently. It's happening right now, I'm sure, from certain nation states and others. But that's changed, that the criminal element, whether a nation state, whether a terrorist, whether a criminal organization or whomever, the tools are now automated. And so, I've spoken to customers that have said, why do I need this? I just sell this widget that nobody necessarily cares about, right? It's plastic hangers. I mean, what's the big deal? Who wants to target a company that sells plastic hangers? And I said, well, you're right. And maybe 20 years ago, I would have said to you, you're 100% right. Nobody's necessarily going to care, possibly your competition, of course. But otherwise, you're probably not going to be targeted. But now it's not about you selling plastic hangers. You're going to be targeted, the people targeting you don't even know who you are, because it's all automated, and they're going to, there's a phishing campaign going to happen. They're going to try to get malware on your computers, lock up ransomware, et cetera. And it's something it's so prevalent now that it's really the equivalent of not protecting yourself while driving. Maybe in 1920 there were, I don't know how many cars on the road, and so it's okay. You didn't wear a seatbelt, if you will. The likelihood of you having an accident was minuscule. Now the likelihood of you having an accident when you drive on the road is exponential.
You triggered something. Go for it.
Do you know why the auto accident that happened in Ohio in 1902 is interesting?
No, tell me.
Because there was a 2-car auto accident in Ohio in 1902. The interesting thing is, it was the only 2 cars in Ohio in 1902. They literally ran around the corner and ran into each other. So your point is bad, sir, and you should feel bad.
That is irony. That is karmic irony.
But I get your point. It's valid. I had to interrupt you. Your point about risk and risk understanding of risk is a really good one. And I want to back up a step. I didn't want to interrupt sort of your rant and your flow, but your point about how companies are loath to classify information. Hell, most companies can't even be bothered to find their information. Asset discovery alone is a problem, much less information classification. So I add on to what you're saying 100%. Please keep going.
And building on to both of you, it goes back to what we were originally talking about in the first segment, which was the basics and doing basic digital hygiene. It's a thing, and it's a very big problem for a lot of businesses. So how can you incorporate log monitoring and SIEM solutions if you're not doing the basics? I mean, they're not like the end all be all,
And I would take that even a step further, because I really am trying to have a whole episode where we just keep talking around it.
What, PCI?
In terms of PCI. No, I think probably logging and monitoring and the requirements from various frameworks that require you to do those types of activities is probably, if not the most iconoclastic example of the tension that exists between security and compliance. It's in the top 5, maybe the top 3 list. In that, we've already talked about how from a security perspective, it's good to know that type of detail. It's good to have that type of information on your fingertips. I, as an aging practitioner, would say it's essential to know what's going on in your network. So you absolutely need to have logs and network activity so you can have some sense that something weird is happening. But too often companies approach it from a compliance perspective only. They're just we have to do something. We don't really understand what it is. We don't understand why we're doing it, why we should be doing it, what benefit there is, but we know we have to do it. So let's find the bare minimum acceptable that's going to get the box checked for PCI or otherwise. So let's go out and buy a solution that a vendor has told us, yes, we will meet this requirement, or engage a managed security service. And then from the compliance perspective, okay, we're done. From the security perspective, you've got so much information at your fingertips, but you don't know that you need to know that information, and you would benefit from knowing that information. That's where I see sort of it's this is security and compliance, and the tension between the two in a nutshell is right here. Agree or disagree, PCI?
Yeah. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I can tell you that, we have some great customers that, frankly, that's what they want to do. They want to check the box, and I have, my team, and what we've come up with is more of a bit of a more consultative approach, and say, okay, we understand that you signed up with us and you came on board because you want to check the box. But now we're going to have these discussions with you, and if they want, of course, we're going to have the discussions with you of going beyond that. What does your security posture look like, and what are we finding as we tap into a customer? What are we actually discovering? And it's interesting, because I have found that even the ones that came on board to check the box, if you will, as soon as we start escalating cases to them, that starts to pique their interest. As long as it's well tuned, of course, which it is, and it's not too noisy. But as soon as we start sending them cases and they start to see, where they have some gaps, they slowly start to realize the value is actually beyond just the compliance, and that there's more business value, to be added as well.
And I'm guessing that you do that in a way that's not strictly answering the call for security or compliance. I think you had alluded to it earlier. You find a way to hook into the business aspect, or the business flow, or the business operation, that there's a way to, if nothing else, not stand in the way of generating revenue, because if we do this, we can enable more of the flow of sales, more of the flow of revenue, or whatever the company's business is.
Yeah, I'll tell you what we've done, which I think is indeed unique in the industry, is, rather than coming up front and saying, for example, we want to consult for you, right? We don't just want to plug in the SIM for you. We actually want to take this a step further. And of course, it's going to cost you X amount of money, which oftentimes can if they're having a hard time seeing the value in monitoring to begin with, then surely it's probably a reach to think that they're going to actually invest more money in seeing beyond the compliance piece. So what we actually developed is a strategy where we onboard the customer, and for every customer that we have a monthly briefing, which is actually led by me with our customers, but we also add to that monthly briefing a senior consultant from our risk, security, and privacy part of our company. And so that senior consultant is there not to be a sales person, not to try to push to sell hours or push to sell some other service, but really more than anything to listen and to add value to that conversation. I'm finding clients are, well, number one, they're delighted. They're amazed that we're doing this because there's no added cost to it. And there's, some move faster than others, but they start that dialogue, and they start to hear the feedback that the consultant is giving them about, the findings, what the Security Operations Center is seeing, and such. And that develops a relationship, just beyond checking the box, and it certainly has proven to pique our clients' interest, especially those that, maybe they don't understand, or they came on board just wanting to check the box. It certainly piqued their interest as to how they could derive more value and why they should, receive more value from monitoring and for their organization.
So to summarize, I guess what I'm hearing is, it's a necessary evil to some. It's a compliance compulsory activity for others. The way that we begin to turn the corner and make it more meaningful and therefore more useful and more true to what the intention was from a security perspective in the first place is to engage customers, whether it's our own companies or whether it's customers engage companies in terms of helping them to understand what it is that they have at their fingertips in terms of information, in terms of the data that's being exposed, and have the knowledge and the experience to be able to apply it to multiple things in order to help sort of pique that interest. At least that's how I see it. I'm one of those consultants that would come in, although you haven't invited me yet to engage with a company during these monthly meetings. Hint, hint. Interesting conversation. Appreciate, Alan, you coming on today to help us talk through this a little bit. It's like a topic that everybody loves to hate, hates to love, and like I said, I think it's one of the key examples within the field of security of where security and compliance are sort of at odds with each other, whether we intend it or not. So that's going to wrap for us today. We've run out of time. We've run over time. But as always, we've had these great conversations, and we like to keep them going. So, Alan, again, thank you for joining us today. Scott and Josh, thanks for your contributions. Josh, have a great rest of your day, birthday celebration. Cheers to you. And one last time, PCI. We're out.